The docking clamps shuddered as the human vessel latched to the alien station, a sound that echoed like a giant heartbeat through the hull. Lieutenant Mason Hale straightened his jacket and tugged at the collar as though neatness would disguise the fact that he was deeply out of his depth. He had been trained in engineering, not diplomacy, but someone higher up had decided his ability to speak plainly would be useful during this fragile exchange. Plain speech was his strength. Yes, though he wondered how far that could carry him among a people who regarded words with the same reverence as oaths. The airlock hissed, releasing a rush of foreign scents, metallic tangs mixed with an almost floral undertone, sharp enough to sting the nose. Mason stepped forward, boots clanging softly against the bridge that joined steel to ivory, human craft to alien construction. The chamber he entered was bright without being warm, lit by bioluminescent patterns that shifted like tides along the walls. Waiting at the far end was his escort, an alien woman taller than him by a handspan, her posture upright as a blade balanced on edge. Her name, relayed in briefing files, was Sci-Fi of the Arindral, an emissary from a species known for meticulous speech and rigid codes of address. Her attire shimmered in gradients of pale silver, as though woven from moonlight. But what struck Mason was not her attire nor her posture. It was the way her eyes fixed on him, intent and unblinking, studying him as though he were a specimen under glass. He stopped a pace away and nodded. "Lieutenant Mason Hale, at your service." Her voice, low and musical, slid between syllables with care. "Sci-Fi of House Vera. Words spoken here are binding. Be mindful, human." Mason tried not to fidget. He reminded himself of the commander's words, their respect strength, but not bluster, honesty, but not foolishness. Show them humanity's spirit without offending their pride. Easy advice from someone who wasn't standing here. They began walking side by side along the corridor, silence stretching long enough to scrape at Mason's nerves. He searched for something to break it, something not too formal, not too careless. His gaze flicked to the glowing walls, then back to her austere face. "You run a tidy place," he said lightly. Her expression didn't shift. "Cleanliness is expected." "Right. Not small talk, then." He cleared his throat, decided to risk humor. "Reminds me of my aunt's kitchen. Everything polished until you could see your reflection. She'd chase us with a spoon if we left fingerprints." That earned the slightest twitch of her mouth, quickly suppressed. A near smile. "Progress." Emboldened, he added, "You'd have liked her. Tough woman. Called me sweetheart even when I towered over her." The words slipped out casually, unconsidered. But Sci-Fi stopped walking as though struck. Her head turned sharply, eyes wide, and a faint shimmer of color rose beneath her translucent skin, a flush unmistakable even if the hue was different from human blush. Mason blinked. "What? Did I say something wrong?" Her lips parted, closed, then parted again. "Repeat it," she whispered, each syllable weighted. "Repeat, what?" "Sweetheart." The word hung in the air, like a stone dropped into still water. Sci-Fi inhaled sharply, her composure cracking. She lowered her gaze, a flicker of something vulnerable passing across her features, before she collected herself with effort. "That term," she said carefully, "is not trivial. To us, it signifies claim, bond, vow." Mason's heart skipped. He'd thought it no more than a harmless endearment, the kind his grandmother scattered over family like breadcrumbs. But here, it was a declaration with the weight of law. "I didn't mean," he began. She silenced him with a look, fierce yet trembling. "Do not retract it." To retract would wound deeper than to speak. He stood frozen in the corridor, suddenly aware that his offhand remark had shifted the ground beneath his feet. The air felt charged, as if the very walls waited for his response. His instincts urged him to apologize, smooth things over, but something in her eyes, shocked, defensive, yearning, stayed his tongue. Instead, he drew a breath, steadied himself. "Well," he said, gentler this time, "I guess I'll have to be careful what I call you." Shaylee's flush deepened, and for a heartbeat she looked less like a perfect envoy and more like a woman grappling with emotions too large to conceal. She turned away, resumed walking, each step deliberate. "Careful indeed," she murmured, though her tone carried a tremor, as if she hoped he would be reckless again. Mason followed, head buzzing. He had come expecting stiff talks of treaties and trade. Instead, with a single word, he had stumbled into something raw and personal. He wondered if he had just created a diplomatic disaster, or if, somehow, he had uncovered a bridge between their species that no careful negotiation could have built. When they reached the end of the corridor, Shoilai paused at the threshold of the council chamber. Her hand lingered against the door's luminous panel, yet she did not press it. She glanced back at him, and in that glance was both warning and invitation. "Be mindful," she said again, but softer this time, almost reluctant. Then the panel slid open and light spilled out, pulling them both into the waiting chamber and the eyes of her people. The words still echoed in Mason's head, heavy now with meaning. Sweetheart. He wasn't sure whether he had made an ally, a mistake, or something far more dangerous. But he knew one thing for certain. Whatever path lay ahead, it had already begun. The chamber radiated a cold brilliance, its walls alive with shifting symbols that pulsed like veins of light. Dozens of Arindrils stood in a crescent around the central dais, their garments flowing like sculpted shadows, their faces composed into unreadable masks. Mason felt each pair of eyes settle on him as Shoilai led him forward, her stride outwardly steady though he noticed the tension coiled in her shoulders. They were meant to discuss trade agreements, resource exchanges, cautious steps toward an alliance. Mason tried to focus on the prepared talking points, but the word he had spoken still pressed on him like a weight in his chest. He risked a glance at Shoilai. Her features were composed again, but that faint blush had not fully faded. He suspected she felt every whisper swirling through the room as keenly as he did. The high speaker, robed in threads of gold, addressed them in measured tones. "Human envoy, you come among us in peace. May your words bind with integrity." Mason inclined his head, careful to mimic the gesture of respect he had been shown in training. He began with the expected statements about cooperation and exchange, but his attention kept drifting to the woman at his side. She listened without interruption, though once, when he paused to breathe, her fingers tightened against the folds of her robe as if restraining something restless inside her. When the session concluded, the high speaker dismissed the assembly with the resonant phrase, "Let these bonds be tended with vigilance." One by one the Arindril dispersed, their departure marked by the whisper of silken garments. Shoilai guided Mason out into a quieter corridor, her pace brisk, her silence heavier than any reprimand. Finally, she stopped beneath a column of light that painted her face in pale hues. "Do you understand what you have done?" she asked, voice pitched low. Mason rubbed the back of his neck. "I'm guessing more than I meant to." Her eyes narrowed, though not in anger. "Among my people, such words are sacred. To call someone what you called me is not banter, it is devotion. It is binding. And you spoke it as though it were air." He wanted to defend himself, to explain how casual such terms were in human speech, but something about her expression, earnest, conflicted, stilled him. Instead he said softly, "I didn't know. But I can't pretend it meant nothing. Not after the way you looked at me." Her composure faltered, a tremor passing across her lips before she pressed them together. A flush spread again beneath her translucent skin, subtle but undeniable. "I warned you," she murmured, "not to repeat it. Yet some part of me," she stopped, drew a steadying breath. "Some part of me wanted you to." Mason felt his chest tighten. "Then why stop me?" "Because words spread faster than intention," she said. "Already they murmur that I am compromised, that the human has mocked me with speech I cannot undo. If those whispers grow, I could be stripped of my station." The revelation landed like a blow. He had imagined personal embarrassment, maybe awkwardness, but not political ruin. He searched her eyes, caught between guilt and defiance. "So what do we do? Pretend it never happened?" She looked away, her voice barely audible. "In public, yes. But in private," her gaze returned to him then, and the steel of her resolve melted to something fragile, luminous. "In private I would hear it again." The words lodged in his throat. He hadn't expected her honesty to cut so close, to reveal longing beneath her rigid mask. He wanted to reach for her hand but stopped, uncertain if even touch carried binding weight here. Instead, he gave her the smallest smile. "Careful, Shoilai. If you keep asking, I might not be able to stop." Her flush deepened, but she held his gaze, unflinching now. Then perhaps I will not ask. Perhaps I will command. The edge in her tone was deliberate, a way of disguising vulnerability with authority, yet her eyes betrayed the plea behind it. Before Mason could respond, a distant chime echoed down the corridor. A pair of Arindril approached, their expressions sharp with curiosity. Shoilai stiffened, her features snapping back into a diplomat's mask. She inclined her head toward Mason, formal again. Lieutenant Hale, you will return to your quarters. Rest. Tomorrow we resume talks. The newcomer slowed, studying the human with open suspicion before following Shaylee's lead. Mason caught the flicker of disapproval in their eyes. Rumors had already taken root. He obeyed her instruction, retreating down the passage toward his assigned chamber. Yet as he walked, he could still hear the tremor in her voice when she had whispered her secret wish. He realized he was no longer simply navigating diplomacy. He was tangled in something far more dangerous, a bond that her culture considered unbreakable, sparked by a single careless word. As his door sealed shut behind him, Mason leaned against the cool metal and exhaled. He should have felt trapped. Instead, he found himself smiling faintly. Somewhere beneath the layers of duty and danger, she had wanted to hear it again. And he wanted to say it. Outside, in the labyrinthine halls of the alien station, whispers spread like wildfire, each retelling twisting the truth into sharper angles. By dawn, the casual human endearment had grown into scandal. Shoilai would soon face questions sharper than any blade, and Mason would have to decide whether to retreat into silence or risk repeating the word that had changed everything. The station's corridors felt narrower in the following days, though Mason knew their dimensions had not changed. It was the way conversations hushed as he passed, the way eyes lingered too long, weighing him with unspoken judgment. Shoilai remained outwardly composed, but he noticed the subtle shifts in her behavior, how she avoided lingering with him in public, how her gaze darted to the shadows where listeners might lurk. Still, when circumstance placed them together in private, her restraint frayed at the edges. One evening, under the pretense of showing him the station's archives, she led him into a chamber lined with translucent panels, their light pulsing like slow heartbeats. Once the door sealed, the mask she wore dissolved. "The council grows restless," she admitted, lowering her voice until it was barely more than a breath. "They believe you have ensnared me with words I could not resist." Mason swallowed. "Did I?" Her eyes flicked to his, wide, vulnerable, then away. "Perhaps," she whispered, "but not as they think. They see weakness, corruption of tradition. I see something else." He stepped closer, careful, not wanting to startle her. "And what do you see?" She hesitated, hands twisting in the fabric of her robe. "You spoke as though affection were a gift to scatter freely, yet somehow, when you said it to me, it felt real. It unsettles me." Mason's pulse quickened. He reached out, stopping just short of her arm. "Shoilai, I didn't know your customs. But I don't regret what I said. Not now." Her breath caught, and for a moment silence thickened between them, heavy with everything unspoken. Then she straightened, composure sliding back into place like armor. "You cannot say it again here. Not unless you are prepared to bind yourself before all my people." The warning rang clear, but beneath it Mason sensed longing. He gave a small nod, letting the silence hold the rest. Their stolen conversation did not remain secret for long. Word spread that Shoilai had lingered too long with the human in the archives, that she had been seen flushed and distracted afterward. Rivals seized on the whispers. A council summons arrived the next morning, demanding that Shoilai account for her compromised conduct. The chamber where she stood trial was colder than the last, the gathered elders cloaked in hues of authority. Mason was not meant to be present, but Shoilai insisted, declaring that his testimony was integral. He stood at her side, feeling the weight of dozens of alien eyes, while the accusations unfurled like blades. "You allowed the outsider to address you with a binding term," one elder declared, voice sharp as glass. "You did not rebuke him. You accepted it." Shaylee's chin lifted. "I did not accept. I contained." To rebuke would have amplified Dishana. Murmurs rippled. Mason could feel her carefully chosen words struggling to shield them both. Yet he also sensed how fragile her defense was, how one wrong question could shatter it. Another elder leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Then tell us, daughter of Vera, if he spoke it again, would you deny him? The silence that followed was suffocating. Shaylee's hands trembled where they rested against her robe. She did not answer quickly enough, and the delay itself was damning. The murmur swelled into a tide of suspicion. Mason could not stay silent. She shouldn't have to deny it, he said, his voice carrying across the chamber. The room froze, all eyes swiveling toward him. He felt his throat tighten, but pressed on. In my culture, calling someone sweetheart doesn't chain them. It doesn't strip them of honor. It means I like them. It means I see them. That's all. Laughter broke from one of the elders, sharp and derisive. Your careless tongue speaks of bonds as if they were trifles. You prove our concern, human. You cannot grasp the weight of words. Mason's temper fled, but he forced himself calm. Maybe not your weight, but I know sincerity when I feel it. And when I said it to her, it wasn't just callous. It was true. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Shaylee's breath hitched audibly, her body taut with the effort not to react. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the high speaker raised a hand. This matter will not be decided here, he intoned. Shaylee of Vera, you will present yourself again at the great convocation. There you will either renounce this bond, or you will embrace it and accept the consequences. Dismissal fell like a stone into silence. Shaylee bowed her head, concealing her face, and led Mason out. Once the chamber doors closed behind them, she exhaled sharply, the first crack in her composure since the trial began. Why did you say that? She demanded, voice shaking. Because it was true, Mason said simply. Her eyes blazed, a storm of conflict and fear. You do not understand what you've done. If I renounce you, I am stripped of honor. If I accept, I am bound to you. Either way, I lose everything I have built. Mason's chest ached at the despair in her tone. Then let me carry some of it. Don't stand alone. For a heartbeat, she looked as though she might break, her face softening, her hand twitching toward his. But then she pulled back, retreating behind walls of duty once more. You cannot help me. Not unless you are willing to speak that word again, not as a jest, not as a slip, but as a vow. And if you do, there will be no path back for either of us. The corridor stretched around them, dim and endless. Mason felt the gravity of her words settle into him like stone. He had stumbled into this bond by accident, but now choice loomed before him, sharp and unavoidable. She turned away, robes whispering against the floor, and left him standing alone. He knew the convocation would come swiftly, and with it, the question of whether he would repeat the word that had already changed both their lives. The convocation chamber was unlike any place Mason had ever stood. Its ceiling arched into shadow, supported by pillars that glowed faintly as though alive, each etched with symbols of lineage and law. Hundreds of Arindril filled the tiers surrounding the central platform, their robes a sea of silver and dusk. The weight of their collective gaze pressed down like an invisible tide. In the center, Shaylee stood tall, her posture immaculate, yet Mason could see the subtle tension in her clenched hands. The high speaker's voice reverberated across the chamber. Shaylee of Vera, you have been accused of allowing the human to bind you with words. Today you will renounce this bond, or you will claim it, and bear the burden such a claim demands. The crowd hushed. Shaylee's gaze flicked briefly toward Mason, a glance sharp as a blade and fragile as glass. He was not meant to speak, he was barely tolerated here. But he could not stand mute, not while her fate was being decided by whispers and tradition. He stepped forward, the sound of his boots echoing unnaturally loud against the polished stone. If you'll hear me. A ripple of outrage broke through the assembly, hisses and sharp words Mason couldn't pause. The high speaker raised a hand, silencing them. The human may speak. Let us witness the depth of his ignorance before judgment falls. Mason swallowed hard, then forced his voice steady. When I called her sweetheart, I didn't know your customs. To me, it wasn't a chain or a vow. It was human. It meant I cared. It meant I saw her not as an emissary or a symbol, but as someone who mattered to me. A murmur spread like fire through dry grass. Shaylee's flush returned, faint but visible, and Mason pressed on. I understand now what it means to you. That the word isn't casual, it's sacred. Maybe that makes me reckless for saying it. But I won't take it back. And I won't pretend I didn't mean it. Because I did. The silence that followed was immense, as though the chamber itself held its breath. One elder rose, his voice slicing the stillness. Do you understand, human, that by repeating it now, you make a vow in the eyes of our people? That you bind yourself not only to her, but to all the consequences of our law? Mason met the elder's gaze without flinching. Then let it bind me. He turned, facing Shoilai fully. His throat tightened, but he forced the word out clear, steady, undeniable. Sweetheart. The chamber erupted. Some shouted in outrage, others gasped, and a rare few murmured with something like awe. Shoilai herself froze, her eyes wide, lips parted as though the air had been stolen from her. The high speaker lifted his voice over the uproar. Shoilai Avera, you have heard him. Will you renounce or accept? For a long moment, she said nothing. Mason feared she would crumble under the weight of expectation, that she would protect her house by discarding him. But then she lifted her chin, shoulders straightening, and the tremor in her hands stilled. I accept, she said, her voice ringing with clarity. I accept, and I claim him in turn. Not as a weakness, not as shame, but as choice. The uproar redoubled, but this time it was fractured, some voices condemning, others rising in uncertain approval. A tide of change rippled through the convocation, the weight of centuries of silence straining against a single spark of defiance. The high speaker's eyes narrowed, but even he could not entirely mask his intrigue. Then it is done. You will bear the consequences of your defiance, Shoilai Avera. The path you have chosen is dangerous, perhaps fatal, but it is yours. The convocation dissolved into chaos, yet Mason barely heard it. His gaze locked with Shaylee's, and in that moment the walls and pillars and voices faded. She crossed the short distance between them, each step deliberate, until she stood so near he could see the faint shimmer of light against her flushed skin. You fool, she whispered, though her tone trembled with something far gentler than anger. Do you realize what you've done? Yeah, Mason said softly, almost smiling. And I'd do it again. For the first time without hesitation, she let her hand brush against his, a fleeting touch that carried the weight of a vow. Around them the council raged and the chamber split with argument, but neither of them moved. Later, when they stood in the quiet of her private chambers, the air no longer heavy with judgment, she regarded him with an expression both tender and fierce. The fire of defiance had not left her eyes, but beneath it lay vulnerability, laid bare. Say it again, she whispered. Mason did not hesitate. He stepped close, his voice low but steady, a promise rather than a jest. Sweetheart. This time, she closed her eyes, the words settling over her like an anchor and a liberation all at once. For the first time, she allowed herself to smile. Outside those walls, the future waited uncertain, riddled with risk. But here, in the fragile space between them, something new had begun, something no council could erase. The single word that had started as a careless slip had become a bond neither of them would abandon. And though the storm still gathered beyond their door, they would face it together. The dawn on Arindril Prime broke in hues of copper and violet, washing the palace spires in shifting light. Mason watched it from the balcony of Shaylee's chamber, the alien sun painting her world with colors he'd never seen on Earth. Behind him, the faint rustle of silk marked Shaylee's presence. She stepped close, her hand grazing the railing beside his, not quite touching. The silence between them was not empty. It was weighted with everything they had said, and everything they dared not. The convocation's verdict still echoed in his mind. Their acceptance had not been approval. It was merely the opening of a door onto a path few survived. He had bound himself with one word, and she had claimed him before all her people. Neither could walk away now without betraying not only each other but themselves. Already they conspire, Shoilai murmured, her gaze on the horizon. Her voice was calm, but Mason heard the undercurrent of unease. Some would see us exiled. Others whisper of assassination. They cannot tolerate what we represent. Mason forced a dry laugh. Back home, a guy gets in trouble for saying the wrong thing to a girl. Hey, it might start a civil war. Her lips twitched, almost a smile. You trivialize it, but you're not wrong. Then her expression sobered. The bond has meaning beyond either of us. They fear change. They fear that a human might alter the course of our lineage. They fear me choosing for myself. He turned to face her fully. And what about you? Are you afraid? For a long moment, she didn't answer. The sunlight played across the ridges of her skin, softening her sternness into something vulnerable. Yes, she said finally, voice low. But fear is not the same as regret. Mason absorbed that quietly, feeling the ground shift beneath them, not physically but in the intangible weight of consequence. He wanted to reach for her, to bridge the distance, but the palace was alive with watching eyes. Their union was not private, it was spectacle, weapon, scandal. The knock at the door came sharp and insistent. Shoilai stiffened, then called, "Enter." A young attendant stepped in, her eyes downcast in deference, but Mason caught the tremor in her voice as she spoke. "Lady Shoilai, emissaries from the council request your presence. They say it cannot wait." Shaylee's jaw tightened. "They mean to test me further." She turned to Mason, her gaze steady but tinged with something urgent. "Come. If they call me to answer, then you must stand at my side. Our word is only as strong as our unity." The council chamber was smaller than the convocation hall, but no less imposing. The walls seemed to close inward, heavy with etched history. Elders lined the semicircle of seats, their robes flowing like liquid shadow. At their center sat the High Speaker, his expression unreadable. "You have declared your choice," he began, his tone neither warm nor cold, simply absolute. "But choice alone does not sustain a bond. The law demands proof. The human must demonstrate his worth, and you must demonstrate that he is more than indulgence. Otherwise, this union collapses, and with it, your standing." Mason's stomach sank. What kind of proof? The speaker's lips curved faintly, the ghost of a smile. "There are trials. Trials of word, of endurance, of loyalty. Few succeed. Fewer still survive." Shaylee's hand tightened briefly on Mason's arm, subtle but deliberate. She spoke with a voice clear as steel. "He will face them, and I will stand with him." A ripple of reaction passed through the council. Surprise, disdain, even curiosity. Mason felt every pair of alien eyes upon him, each measuring, weighing, predicting his failure. But beneath the pressure, a spark lit inside him. Not defiance alone, but the realization that this was more than ritual. This was the chance to show them he wasn't an accident in their story. That night, back in the quiet of her chambers, Mason let the tension break in a long exhale. "They want me to jump through hoops just to prove I deserve to be here. Sounds familiar, honestly. My whole life has been people betting against me." Shoilai studied him, her expression softer now, stripped of formality. "Do you resent me for binding you to this?" He shook his head without hesitation. "No. I might be scared out of my mind, but if it means standing with you, then it's worth it." He paused, searching her gaze. "I just need to know one thing. If I fail, if I can't pass their trials, what happens to you?" Her silence was answer enough. She didn't need to say it. His failure would cost her everything. Her house, her standing, maybe her life. Mason leaned forward, his voice low, steady, determined. "Then I won't fail." For the first time since the convocation, Shoilai let herself lean against him, the briefest brush of her head against his shoulder. It was not weakness but trust, fragile and unspoken. Outside, the city lights shimmered beneath the alien sky, and the palace walls thrummed with a quiet hum of unseen watchers. The trials loomed ahead, uncertain and perilous, yet Mason felt a strange calm settle over him. The conflict was no longer abstract, no longer about words spoken in ignorance. It was about proving, to them, to her, and to himself, that what had begun with a single reckless word could withstand the fire about to come. And as Shaylee's breath warmed his shoulder, he understood with sharp clarity, the central battle was no longer survival alone. It was belonging. It was the fight to turn a forbidden bond into something undeniable. The night deepened, carrying them both toward the storm that waited just beyond the horizon. The courtyard chosen for the first trial was carved into the mountainside, open to the alien sky. Jagged peaks loomed beyond, and the air carried the chill of high altitude. Torches burned along the edges, their flames flickering against stone marked with centuries of scars from past contenders. Mason stood at the center, feeling the weight of history pressing on him as much as the council's gaze from the viewing tiers. Sci-Fi stood close enough for him to hear her whisper. They will test your words first. They call it the trial of truth. Speak as yourself, not as what they expect you to be. Her hand brushed his wrist for the briefest moment before she withdrew, retreating to the side where she was forbidden to intervene. The high speaker's voice cut across the courtyard. Human Mason, you are bound by vow to Sci-Fi of Vera. Declare before us why your bond should be recognized. And beware, Fossard will not hold beneath the veil. A figure stepped forward carrying a crystalline device that glowed with soft pulses of light. Mason felt a shiver as it was placed before him. The veil. He didn't know exactly how it worked, but he understood enough. Lies would betray him here. He cleared his throat, the silence expectant and crushing. I didn't plan this. I didn't come here to make history, or to stand in your halls, or to claim your daughter of Vera as mine. I said a word, a simple word, and somehow it carried meaning in your culture I couldn't have imagined. But I won't take it back. I care about her. I respect her. She's not just someone I admire. She's someone I'm willing to fight for, even if the whole weight of your world stands against it. The crystal pulsed brighter, casting a glow that spread across the courtyard. Gasps rippled through the watchers. The veil had confirmed his words. The high speaker's expression didn't shift, but there was a faint sharpness in his tone. And if your care brings her ruin? If your presence destroys the very order that sustains her people? Mason's jaw tightened. Then I'll carry that weight with her. Not instead of her. Not in her place. With her. The crystal flared again, brighter still, and this time the murmurs carried not only shock but reluctant respect. The trial of truth ended. But the council was not finished. Another elder rose, his robes gleaming like liquid steel. The human speaks. Now let him endure. Let us see if his body can carry what his words promise. The trial of endurance begins. Mason's gut twisted. He knew what was coming before they brought it. A gauntlet of physical tests designed for bodies not human, but Arindril, taller, stronger, bred in different gravity. The first challenge was simple on paper. Lift a weighted stone and carry it across the courtyard before the flame gutters out. When Mason bent to grip the stone, he nearly cursed it aloud. It was twice as heavy as it looked, jagged edges biting into his palms. The moment he strained upward, fire lanced through his arms and spine. He staggered 2 steps, the stone dragging at him, the crowd already murmuring predictions of failure. Then he heard Shaylee's voice, low, urgent, threading through the noise. Don't prove them wrong. Prove yourself right. He clenched his teeth, shifted his weight, and kept moving. Each step was agony, his muscles screaming, sweat burning his eyes. The torch flame dwindled, guttering. But just as it bent low, Mason dropped the stone over the line, collapsing to his knees with a ragged gasp. The silence that followed was profound. Even the council seemed unwilling to break it. Then the torch steadied, and the murmurs rose again, tinged now with disbelief. The trial of endurance was complete. They did not grant him rest. The next trial was called the trial of loyalty. A blade was placed in his hand, and an illusory figure shimmered into being before him, an image of Sci-Fi, captured perfectly, down to the defiance in her eyes. The high speaker's voice carried across the courtyard. Strike. Prove you will choose survival, even over her. Or stay your hand, and prove that loyalty binds you more than life itself. Mason stared at the illusion, his chest heaving from the exertion of the last trial. He tightened his grip on the blade, then loosened it. If survival means betraying her, then I don't want it. He let the blade fall, clattering against stone. The illusion dissolved, leaving only the sound of the blade echoing into silence. The veil shimmered once more, bathing him in light, sealing the truth of his choice. Shaylee's hands were clenched at her sides, but her eyes burned with pride she could not voice. The trials ended, though Mason sensed there were more they might invent, more ways to break him if they wished. Yet the council did not call for another. The high speaker rose, his expression unreadable as always. The human has spoken truth. He has endured. He has chosen loyalty. Perhaps he survives not by strength but by resolve. Perhaps that, too, has worth. His words carried the weight of reluctant acknowledgement. Mason's legs trembled as he rose to his feet. He expected relief to flood him, but instead, he felt only the simmer of something greater than survival. The trials had not ended the conflict. They had only sharpened it. He and Sci-Fi were still targets, still defiant sparks against the cold machine of tradition. But now the fire between them had been tested, and it had not gone out. As the council dismissed them, Sci-Fi came to his side, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've done more than I dreamed possible. But the storm has only begun." Mason met her gaze, his body aching but his resolve unbroken. "Then we face it together, sweetheart." Her flush returned, soft and fierce all at once, and for the first time she let the words settle openly between them, a vow spoken not in ignorance but in defiance of everything set against them. Beyond the courtyard, the peaks caught the last fire of sunset, casting long shadows down the valley. Somewhere within those shadows, enemies gathered, waiting for their chance to strike. The trials had proven his worth, but they had also painted a target on his back. Mason knew it, and so did she. But as they left the courtyard side by side, the danger no longer felt like a wedge between them. It was the crucible where something unshakable had begun. The central conflict had not ended. It had only revealed its true scope. And for the first time, Mason welcomed it.